Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This is the Bodega Cat Book Club Financial Edition. And today we're continuing our reading of Gold Warriors by Sterling and Peggy Seagrave. And the subtitle is called America's Secret Recovery of Yamashita's Gold. So this particular book was inspired by current events, if you will, especially in the financial market, and in particular the precious metals market. Um, So I thought it would be interesting to read about alternative financial, I don't know what you want to call it, currencies, I guess you can call it, and some of the histories behind it, particularly, hidden histories or histories that we don't learn about at school. Not that we ever learn anything financial stuff at school, right? Anyways, so that's where the inspiration comes from. But before we begin, I want to welcome everybody here today. If you like what we do here, please do consider checking out our other book clubs. We have the spiritual book clubs on Mondays and health book clubs on Wednesdays. And we put all the book clubs that we've read, as well as our reading, on YouTube. And we have it in a playlist. So you guys can just download it and listen to it when you're walking your dog or exercising or multitasking or stuck in traffic, whatever works for you. And we have other stuff, contents on there as well, not just the book club. So please do check it out and like and subscribe and comment and whatever else you do on YouTube. There's so many things that they have you do now. It's like so confusing. But anyways, do check it out over there and follow us there. And then please do consider subscribing to our monthly newsletter as well. And if you want to support us further, you can buy me a coffee, leave a donation. Check out our merch. We have many different merches for your fur babies, your kitties and doggies, as well as humans. And we're always updating our current designs and um, coming up with new designs every month. So please do come back often and check that out and support us that way. And if you're in the Los Angeles area or visiting LA, please do consider come visiting us at our healing center. We have a healing center that we use technologies based on Nikola Tesla's scalar wave research for holistic healings for both domestic cats and dogs as well as humans. So you can read all about that technology on our website as well as our other services as well. But whichever way, shape, or form that you guys support us, we appreciate it very, very much. But most importantly, thank you for being here. Thank you for being on this book club journey with us. I think reading is a lost art, and kudos to you guys for sticking it out and staying with us and listening to or reading with us the books. I think books are very valuable. There's nothing like reading, especially with a physical book where you can touch and feel and, kind of kinesthetically and feel the energy of the book. It's very different from, let's say, Kindle or whatever, right? Okay. So this is there something else I wanted to say? Yes. Okay. So this particular book has endnotes at the end of the chapter. And what I'll do for this particular book is I'll read like a page or so, and then read the endnotes in the back. So the endnotes sometimes have long paragraphs where they go into like backstories and things. Um, so that's why we do it. Usually I don't read the endnotes, but for this particular book I do. All right, let's do it. This is chapter 7, and this will be part 1. And I hope you guys are having fun reading this book with us. It kind of reads like a story, like a Hollywood story almost. And if you have a book, you can follow with us there. If not, you can follow with us here on camera. And then I'm going to move the camera in just a little bit here so you guys can see better, so that I can see better. Okay. All right. Okay, very good. Let's see. I'm just going to make it just right and we will begin. Okay, chapter 7. Again, this is part 1. Down the rabbit hole. On September 2nd, 1945, after receiving official notice of Japan's formal capitulation, the tall, bull-necked figure of General Yamashita Tomoyuki appeared along a mountain trail, his left hand holding his samurai sword, approaching American lines to surrender himself and his staff. During the last month, American forces had advanced only 3 miles. Under siege in the Kyengan pocket, Yamashita had lost a lot of weight. He also had lost a lot of men. But he did not commit ritual suicide because he said, quote, if I blame myself or if I kill myself, someone else will have to take the blame, end quote. Behind his staff, officers came to his driver. Behind his staff, officers came his driver and others. They were met by a U.S. Army reception committee, including military police Major A.S. Jack Kenworthy, who would make the arrest and escort the men to New Bilibot prison just outside Manila. Manila. Yamashita stopped and waited for his officers to take positions around him, or behind him, sorry. According to Lieutenant Colonel Leslie M. Fry, who was present, a number of younger Japanese bringing up the rear came forward carrying gold bars, which were stacked neatly by one side, altogether about half a metric ton. Yamashita unbuckled his sword, bowed deeply, and presented it to Major Kenworthy. 5 months later, on February 23rd, 1946, after what many described as a grotesque miscarriage of justice, Yamashita was hanged. No mention of plundered treasure or of looting during the war was made in the charges against Yamashita or during his trial. He was charged with war crimes because of the atrocities committed against his explicit orders by Admiral Iwabuchi's sailors and Marines in Manila. It was the first time in history that the United States, as a sovereign power, tried a general of a defeated enemy nation for alleged war crimes. The tribunal in Manila was not supposed, sorry, the tribunal in Manila was not composed of men with legal degrees, and only hearsay evidence was offered to link Yamashita to the crimes. Nonetheless, the prosecution was badgered by MacArthur's headquarters to quicken its pace, to minimize court procedure, and to allow hearsay evidence. Yamashita's defense team appealed to the United States Supreme Court. Two Supreme Justices denounced the conduct of the trial. Justice Murphy said, quote, the petitioner was rushed to trial under an improper charge, given insufficient time to prepare an adequate defense, and there was no serious attempt to prove that he committed a recognized violation of the laws of war. He was not charged with personally participating in the acts of atrocity or with ordering or condoning their commission. Not even knowledge of these crimes was attributed to him, end quote. Justice Rutledge, the other dissenter, concluded that the process had departed, quote, from the whole British American tradition of common law and the Constitution, end quote. He concluded with Thomas Paine's warning, quote, he that would make his own liberty secure must guard even his enemy from oppression. For if he violates this duty, he establishes a precedent that will reach to himself, end quote. Okay, let's read some of the endnotes in the back here. Oh, let's see here. Okay. So, Chapter 7. Some people are under the impression that General Yamashita was tried in Japan during the Tokyo war crimes trials, which began after the start of the Nuremberg trials and concluded after the end of the Nuremberg trials. In fact, General Yamashita was tried in the Philippines, not in Japan. He was arraigned with General Homa on 8 October 1945, and his trial began on 29 October 1945, weeks before the Nuremberg trials began on 20 November 1945, and months ahead of the Tokyo trials. Yamashita was hanged on 23 February 1948, 8 months before the Nuremberg verdicts were handed down on 1 October 1946. So whether you draw your conclusion from the time the court case started or from the time the verdicts were handed down, the conclusion is exactly as we expressed it here. Yamashita was the first general of a defeated nation tried by the United States for war crimes. This point has been made by several scholars, of whom we are only the most recent. Observers at the trials were puzzled why Yamashita's case was hurried through, why he was convicted exclusively on hearsay, and why he was hanged so quickly. It is now evident that Washington was anxious to eliminate Yamashita as fast as possible to avoid any possibility of word getting out about the war gold recoveries. Wow, that's incredible. Okay, so the note about Yamashita's surrender, you could find that in George F. Guy, The Defense of General Yamashita, in Yearbook 1981 Supreme Court Historical History. Guy was on Yamashita's defense team. The note about Yamashita's gold bars. Lieutenant Colonel Fry's battalion was at the surrender site. Fry, an attorney from Reno, Nevada, had a long and distinguished career after the war. The note about Yamashita being hanged. Yamashita was hanged. There are theories that a double was hanged in Yamashita's place as part of a deal between MacArthur and Hirohito. See Chapter 14. Yamashita was said to have been spirited off to Brazil, where Japan owned an immense ranch. Many people think this is unlikely, but some who knew Yamashita well said the man shown surrendering in the famous photo taken in the Kyengan pocket is not Yamashita, but a stand-in. Even so, such a ranch exists, and the other war survivors are known to have gone there to live, including the famous holdout, Lieutenant Onoda Hiro. See Onoda Never Surrender. Just a side note, they said the same about Hitler and his generals, how Hitler faked his death and then went to where is that South American country? Went to Argentina and lived a long life. Hitler did with his wife, whatever, family. Anyways, take the information as you will. If you want to call it conspiracy theory, then you could call it conspiracy theory. If you want to call it conspiracy fact, you can call it conspiracy fact, but it's floating out there. There's actually a documentary that was done about Hitler escaping to Argentina. I think it's still on YouTube. I'm not sure. Anyways, for those of you who are listening who can find that documentary, please put it in the comment below and share it. Very interesting video. Okay, continuing on the end notes. The note about charges against Yamashita. On 26 September 1945, he was served with a generic charge of war crimes. Quote, between October 9, 1944 and September 2nd, 1945, in the Philippine Islands, he unlawfully disregarded and failed to discharge his duty as commander to control the operations of the members of his command, permitting them to commit brutal atrocities and other high crimes, and thereby violated the law of war, end quote. The charge brought against Yamashita is quoted in Lori Barber, quote, the Yamashita War Crimes Trial Revisited, end quote. About Yamashita's guilt or innocence, there are partisans on both sides. Those who saw him as a major war criminal and those who thought he was railroaded. The same can be said of General Homa. But things were never that simple. In Malaya and in the Philippines, Yamashita commanded men who carried out a range of grisly atrocities as if they were normal everyday practice in Japan. While Yamashita was still in Manila, massacres of Filipino civilians took place just south of the city in Batangas and Laguna, with a death toll equal to that of the rape of Manila a month later. And there is little solid evidence that Yamashita actually did order Manila to be spared. Both Yamashita and Homa were complex characters. Homa was a playwright whose friends, including Prince Chichibu and his wife, thought he was a very gentle man. In recent years, it became fashionable to blame the worst atrocities of the Bataan Death March not on Homa, but on Tsuji, who sought to inflame Japanese soldiers wherever he was in order to inflate his image as Japan's most celebrated hothead. However, research by Fred Baldessare has shown that Tsuji left the Philippines in 10 April, a few hours after the death march began. The notion that Homa was unaware of the brutality of his men, Baldessare says, is nonsense. Responsibility for moving more than 60,000 American and Filipino POWs from Mariveles, Bataan, and to Capas, Turlac was placed by Homa on Major General Kawani Yoshikata and Staff Officer Colonel Takatsu Toshimitsu, whose preoccupation with other responsibilities contributed to the tragedy. Homa was under intense pressure from Tokyo to overwhelm resistance on the island of Corregidor. Takatsu had to rush equipment and men into position for the Corregidor offensive. The trucks set aside by America's General King for the purpose of moving POWs were instead used to rush Japanese soldiers and equipment to the front. So the sick and malnourished POWs were forced to march overland at a killing pace, many of them collapsing. Their guards became impatient, grew meaner until an orgy of barbarism ensued. Along the way, other Japanese units massacred large groups of POWs in revenge for their stubborn defense of Bataan in preceding months. Homa was fully aware of this, for the death march passed directly in front of his field headquarters. Homa admitted at his trial that he had driven along the route and seen the prisoners. Quote, the result, Baldessare says, was a blend of Japanese incompetence, frustration, and sadism. In the 1980s and 1990s, there was a great need to beautify Homa and Yamashita and to show that it was not the Japanese people, government, or culture to blame, but rather a few rotten apples whose behavior was most regrettable. The ultimate villains were Hirohito and the Chrysanthemum Club. End quote. Hirohito personally oversaw and approved strategic and policy decisions of the Imperial General Headquarters, including orders the High Command issued to mass murder POWs. The Emperor's hands-on responsibility was neatly summed up by his former Prime Minister, Prince Konoe. The Emperor, quote, the Emperor was Japan's major war criminal, end quote. And the the note about the first time in history, Yamashita's trial was precedent breaking. Guy, Defense of General Yamashita. Oh, you could find that in Guy, Defense of General Yamashita. The prosecution was badgered by MacArthur. You could find that in Barber, Yamashita War Crimes Trial. See also Brackman, the other Nuremberg. Wow. It's quite a backstory, isn't it? Very interesting. Okay, continuing in the chapter. Yamashita's conviction was not overturned. After a failed appeal to President Truman, who did not respond at all, Yamashita was hanged. Many thought he was railroaded because MacArthur was a vainglorious man who wanted revenge for being made to look incompetent. But we now know there was a hidden agenda. But it was not possible to torture General Yamashita physically without this becoming evident to his defense attorneys. Members of his staff were tortured instead. In particular, his driver, Major Kojima Kashi, was given special attention. He had accompanied Yamashita everywhere since the general had arrived from Manchuria in October 1944 to take over the defense of the Philippines from General Kuruda Shigenori. In charge of the torture of Major Kojima was a Filipino-American intelligence officer named Severino Garcia Diaz Santa Romana, whose friends called him Santi. He was a big-boned man, tall, with a high, broad forehead, who looked like a judo black belt or the genie that popped out of an old green bottle. Because of the recent Japanese savagery in Manila, Santi was enjoying his work. Many Filipinos have been cruelly tortured and beheaded. Women and girls were gang raped in the streets, many of them disemboweled and hacked to pieces. But Santi and his assistants were careful. They did not want to kill Major Kojima or to damage his memory. What Santi wanted to know was where the gold was hidden. He wanted the major to reveal each place where he had taken General Yamashita during the past year, where bullion and other plundered treasure was placed for recovery later. He wanted the major to take him to each site to point out the entrance and to describe the booby traps in detail. This brutal interrogation of Major Kojima produced results that astounded everyone, from General MacArthur all the way up to the White House, and became one of the biggest state secrets of the 20th century. Even today, it remains carefully obscured by making all archival records on this topic inaccessible for reasons of national security. It is no exaggeration to say that Santi's results greatly altered America's leverage throughout the world during the Cold War. So astonishing are the consequences that we must take a step back now and be meticulous in examining every detail closely. For example, who was Santi and for whom was he really working? Who ordered him to torture Major Kojima? Today, Santa Romana remains a legendary but mysterious figure at the CIA and in Manila, where it is not unusual for people to deny that he ever existed. When they speak of him at all, senior CIA officials always say that Santi was an OSS agent, implying that he was working for America's Wartime Intelligence Agency, the Office of Strategic Services headed by General William Wild Bill Donovan. But that turns out to be a meaningless generality, for Santi never was an OSS agent, and when he tortured Major Kojima, the OSS had officially ceased to exist. We also must ask how Santi knew about the hidden treasure of Golden Lily. That is easier to answer. Okay, let's read some of the endnotes in the back. That was, okay, page 89. All right, so the note about dissenting opinions of Supreme Court Justices Murphy and Rutledge, you can find that in Barber Yamashita War Crimes Trial. The Yamashita appeal and the Supreme Court decision is available online. The current Bosnian war crimes trials have brought Yamashita's case back into the limelight. The note about Major Kojima. The name of Yamashita's driver and the circumstances of his torture was given to us by a source close to Santa Romana and confirmed by retired CIA sources who asked not to be named. When we interviewed Lansdale for Song Dynasty, he said at one point, quote, "Everything changed after we debriefed Major Kojima," end quote. When we interviewed Lansdale for Marcos Dynasty, he became evasive and changed the subject. Robert Curtis was told the same story by Colonel Villacruzes. Villacruzes said he was told about Kojima during his 1968 meeting in Tokyo with Ishihara. See chapter 10. Curtis to authors, April 2nd, 2001. Throughout his career, Lansdale justified his own use of torture and atrocity against the enemy and prisoners of war because it was an appropriate response to their glum and deadly practices. See Lansdale in the Midst of Wars, page 72. He cut his teeth on the interrogation of Japanese prisoners of war and then moved on to the hooks in the Philippines and then to the Vietnamese. All the while, he chanted his quaint Burma shave jingles and concocted Madison Avenue's spin, quote, to construct a squeaky clean Boy Scout image, behind which he masked his own perverse delight in atrocity, end quote. See Valentine, Operation Phoenix, page 26. The note about Severino Garcia Diaz Santa Romana. Santa Romana's photographs, documents written by and about him, his will, his marriage certificate, bank certificates, New York State Tax Office documents, and statements from CIA Deputy Director Ray Klein concerning Santa Romana appear on our CD. Much more on Santa Romana is found in Chapter 10 and 15. The note about torture of Kojima. It seems likely that Yamashita was kept informed of the torture of Kojima, and that this was used as a form of torture by proxy. He would have been pained to know that he was being spared physical torture while Major Kojima was taking a terrible beating. Wow. Very interesting. Okay, let's continue in the chapter. In Europe, the OSS at times worked closely with other intelligence office services, but competition and rivalry were intense. One of the fiercest turf battles over the tracking of Nazi loot went on inside the US government, waged between Secretary of the Treasury Henry Morgenthau and Alan Dulles, the OSS chief in Switzerland, a romantic who had a much more cavalier attitude about such things. Axis loot was being moved under the noses of the Allies into neutral safe havens. In one instance, American agents in Switzerland watched 280 trucks of Nazi gold move from Germany across France and Spain to the safe haven of neutral Portugal. Owned by private Swiss firms, the trucks were painted with the Swiss cross, allowing the gold to be moved under neutral cover. However, while the gathering of intelligence on war loot may have been disjointed, ultimately all such reports were passed up to the Office of the Secretary of War, Henry L. Stimson. He had a special interest in the subject of looted bullion and kept a group of financial experts thinking hard about it. 3 of these men were Stimson's special assistants, John J. McCloy, Robert Levitt, and consultant Robert B. Anderson. The problem of how to deal with plundered treasure and what to do with Axis gold after the war was discussed in July 1944 when 44 nations met at the resort of Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to plan the post-war economy. These discussions, some of them extremely secret, revealed the flaws and loopholes that existed in the international financial system, making any clear-cut resolution unlikely. Among the delegates, trust was far from universal. Many of them believed that the Bank of International Settlements was secretly laundering Nazi loot. That distrust set the tone. Among other things, the Bretton Woods Agreement, as it was made public, set a fixed price for gold of $35 an ounce and banned the importation of gold to America for personal use. Neutral countries that signed the pact promised not to knowingly accept stolen gold and other looted assets, but Portugal forgot to include Macau in the list of its dependent territories. This was a convenient oversight, for during the rest of the war, as we saw in Chapter 4, Macau became a world center for trade in illicit gold and was heavily exploited by Japan. Unlike Europe, where the OSS was tolerated by General Dwight Eisenhower, in the Southwest Pacific, General MacArthur resisted all attempts by the OSS to get a foothold in his territory. MacArthur and his staff intended to conduct their own brand of special operations from their headquarters in Australia without any interference. Okay, let's read some of the endnotes in the back here. All right, I'm trying to find out what page I was supposed to read. Oh, page 90. Okay. All right, here's some endnotes. Here we go. The note about the United States government had full knowledge of Japan's looting in Asia. In fact, it would have been unusual for the Japanese not to loot the conquered countries. What was not then known, however, was the systematic nature of the looting, as well as the involvement of the extended imperial family. Reports of General MacArthur in Japan, The Occupation Military Phase, Volume 1 supplement describes Japanese-owned gold and silver, property that was acquired by Japan under duress, wrongful actions of confiscation, disposition, or spoliation. Oh, wow. Never seen that word before. Spoliation. That's a new word for me. Property found in Japan and identified as having been located in an allied country and removed to Japan by fraud or coercion by the Japanese or their agents. Great hoards of gold, silver, precious stones, foreign postage stamps, engraving plates, precious metals, and diamond stockpiles owned or controlled by the Japanese, and the discovery of 30,000 carats of diamonds and 52.5 pounds of platinum. Relevant pages of this original documents are reproduced on our CDs. Looting is one of the issues that are to be examined by the terms of the Japanese Imperial Government Disclosure Act, but the restraints already being imposed on the review and release of such documents give little hope that the governments of Japan and the United States are going to willingly divulge the secrets. See the Japanese Imperial Government Disclosure Act reproduced in full on our CDs. The note about Bollinger's story. Bollinger's story was related to the authors by his son, Jean Bollinger, letters of May 4, I think it's May 4 and 5. I think that's what it means, 1999. Bollinger was with a guerrilla unit with 25 men under the command of Captain Jesus Medina of the Philippines Scouts. Medina was captured by the Japanese, tortured, and beheaded. The note about Fujimaru, we identified the ship as the Fujimaru by comparing Bollinger's photograph with ship profiles from the U.S. Naval Intelligence Database. The ship is disguised with false superstructures to alter its profile. Bollinger's photograph of the ship appears on our CDs. Did we read that? It doesn't sound familiar. Let me see here some. Oh, no, we did not. Okay. Let's pause. We're going to read that chapter. I didn't think that was familiar. Okay, anyways, let's go back to the chapter here. America had realized for some time that Japan was hiding plundered treasure in the Philippines. Although the details were not shared with Britain or other allies, during the last year of the war, for example, Americans fighting alongside Filipino guerrillas observed a heavily laden Japanese hospital ship unloading bronze boxes at Subic Bay near Manila. U.S. Navy warrant officer John C. Bollinger, disguised as a fisherman, secretly photographed the vessel from a highly painted Filipino fishing pirogue. It was not a real hospital ship. After studying the ship's profile and comparing it with naval intelligence records, we were able to identify it as the fast liner Fujimaru, built in 1937, which had been disguised with false superstructures and huge crosses painted on her sides. As a fake hospital ship, the Fujimaru was carrying war loot from Singapore to Manila for Prince Chichibu and Golden Lily. Bollinger's unit, led by the guerrilla hero Captain Medina, followed the convoy of army trucks carrying this odd cargo into the mountains. There, they watched Japanese soldiers lug the very heavy boxes into a cave. Bollinger had no idea what was in them, but it was clearly something of great value. 4 men were needed to move each box using a sling harness. When the Japanese sealed and disguised the cave entrance and left, the guerrillas took several days to reopen the cave and found that the boxes inside contained 75-kilo gold bars. There were rows upon rows of boxes. Photographs of the ship, along with a report of the cave full of gold, were sent by submarine to MacArthur's intelligence headquarters in Australia, adding to many similar reports. According to Bollinger's son, Gene, his father assumed that he was reporting to the OSS, but nothing was that simple. Some months later, when American troops had landed on Leyte, Bollinger witnessed another movement of treasure by the Japanese. This time, a convoy of trucks carried heavy boxes out of the Japanese army headquarters in Baguio to a tunnel near a hospital on the outskirts of town. Bollinger's son, Gene, told us, quote, "This was not nearly as big a secret at the time as the Japanese wanted it to be. They were in a big hurry and made the mistake of not paying attention. Medina's company kicked their ass and blew the tunnel shut, Japanese and all," end quote. A report on this action also was passed up the line by John Bollinger to the OSS. Because of the intense secrecy surrounding this subject, trying today to trace any of those intelligence reports on war loots is like falling down a rabbit hole, entering a subterranean world full of lies, evasions, and mad hatters. Americans' wartime effort to monitor movements of looted gold bullion was indeed a major responsibility of the OSS, a precursor of the CIA. There also were special intelligence units responsible for monitoring displaced and looted artworks. The Art Looting Investigative Unit and the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives Group. Just a side note, there's a Hollywood movie that was made about the monuments. It's got, if I remember correctly, Matt Damon, George Clooney, a couple of other famous people. I don't remember now. You could find it on YouTube. Interesting movie. Anyways, but these were much more effective in Europe than in Asia. Compared to Europe, Allied intelligence services in Asia and the Pacific were fragmented and did not cooperate. In any case, efforts to keep track of looted art or shipments of precious metals in East Asia were unsatisfactory because of geographical, cultural, and linguistic barriers. Nearly all those records kept by intelligence services of the United States have since been made to vanish. What has surfaced did so accidentally. Okay, let's read the endnote about that page. That's page 90. Okay. Okay, so we read about the United States government having full knowledge of Japan's looting. I'm not going to read that again. We also read about Bollinger's story as related or uh, as related. What's the word I want? As related by his son, Gene. So we talked about that. And then we talked about the Fujimaru as a disguised hospital ship. So let us read about the boxes. Okay, Ballinger had no idea what was in the boxes from the Fujimaru. Gene Bollinger emails to the authors, 1999. Medina's guerrillas following the Japanese inland. Gene Bollinger to authors. The note about records of the loot Of course, the Japanese records have vanished, as is reported by the Interagency Task Force, charged with the review of records under the Japanese Imperial Disclosure Act interim report reproduced in full on our CDs. This, of course, fails to take into consideration documents that never reached Washington, like those given to Herbert Hoover. General Bonner Fellers, MacArthur's assistant in Tokyo, wrote on June 23, 1967, that, quote, Herbert Hoover had no trouble in securing a tremendous amount of documentation from the Japanese War Office. He sent back an enormous number of documents from Japan, end quote. These too have disappeared. Wow, that is incredible. Okay, let's continue in our reading in the chapter. In Europe, the OSS at times worked closely with other intelligence services, but competition and rivalry were intense. One of the fiercest turf battles over the tracking of Nazi loot went on inside the US government, waged between Secretary of the Treasury Henry Morgenthau and Alan Dulles, the OSS chief in Switzerland, a romantic who had a much more cavalier attitude about such things. Axis loot was being moved under the noses of the Allies into neutral, safe havens. In one instance, American agents in Switzerland watched 280 trucks of Nazi gold move from Germany across France and Spain to the safe haven of neutral Portugal. Owned by private Swiss firms, the trucks were painted with the Swiss cross, allowing the gold to be moved under, quote, neutral cover. However, while the gathering of intelligence on war loot may have been disjointed, ultimately all such reports were passed up to the office of the Secretary of War, Henry L. Stimson. He had a special interest in the subject of looted bullion and kept a group of financial experts thinking hard about it. 3 of these men were Stimson's special assistants, John J. McCloy, Robert Lovett, and consultant Robert B. Anderson. The problem of how to deal with plundered treasure and what to do with Axis gold after the war was discussed in July 1944 when 44 nations met at the resort of Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to plan the post-war economy. These discussions, some of them extremely secret. Wait a minute, this sounds familiar. Have I read this before? Well, anyways, I'll read it again, I guess. These discussions, some of them extremely secret, revealed the flaws and loopholes that existed in the international financial system, making any clear-cut resolution unlikely. Among the delegates, trust was far from universal. Many of them believed that the Bank of International Settlements was secretly laundering Nazi loot. That distrust set the tone. Among other things, the Bretton Woods Agreement, as it was made public, set a fixed price for gold of $35 an ounce and banned the importation of gold to America for personal use. Neutral countries that signed the pact promised not to knowingly accept stolen gold and other looted assets, but Portugal forgot to include Macau in the list of its dependent territories. This was a convenient oversight, for during the rest of the war, as we saw in Chapter 4, Macau became a world center for trade in illicit gold and was heavily exploited by Japan. Unlike Europe, where the OSS was tolerated by General Dwight Eisenhower, in the Southwest Pacific, General MacArthur resisted all attempts by the OSS to get a foothold in his territory. MacArthur and his staff intended to conduct their own brand of special operations from their headquarters in Australia without any interference. I felt a little bit like deja vu there. There were some parts that I felt like I've read. Let me see here. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Maybe there's a glitch in the matrix. Okay, 91. Okay, let's read the endnotes about on that page. So the note about the intense competition between Secretary of Treasury Henry Morgenthau and the Office of Strategic Services. You can find that in Bauer, Blood Money, Foreign and Commonwealth Office, Nazi Gold, the London Conference, 2 to 4 December, or December 2 to 4, 1997. The note about OSS being well informed about the movement of Nazi loot through Europe. The OSS was well informed about the movement of Nazi loot through Europe. The instance of the 280 trucks passing through Switzerland. You can find that in Ziegler, The Swiss, page 71. It was useful to watch the loot, not necessarily because it was going to be repatriated to the looted countries or individuals, but because to the victor goes the spoils. In subsequent chapters, we discuss how this actually happened when the OSS took over Axis assets after the war. The note about Macau as a loophole for international gold trade. Macau as a loophole for the international gold trade was an oversight of the Bretton Woods agreements. Like the trucks passing through Switzerland, Macau's gold trade was being closely monitored by all of the Allied governments who had agents placed in this neutral haven. See Lintner. And just a side note, Macau is known as the Las Vegas of the East. Okay, the note about the Bank of International Settlements. That the Bank of International Settlements engaged in money laundering, finding aid to Record Group 238, records of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, National Archives and Records of Service. The note about Macau was forgotten. You could find that in Bauer, Blood Money, page 73. Lintner, also in Lintner, Friends in Need. The note about the Office of Strategic Services. The Office of Strategic Services was blocked from the Pacific. You can find that in Hogan, U.S. Army Special Operations in World War II, CMH publication 70 to 42, Department of the Army, 1992, page 63. The note about the biographical details about Willoughby. Biographical details about Willoughby. You can find that in Campbell, Major General Charles A. Willoughby, A Mixed Performance in American Intelligence Journal, Volume 18, number 1 to 2, 1998, page 87 to 91. Willoughby's private papers are at the Gettysburg College Musselman Library. There is a dearth of material from the occupation period. Obviously, sensitive records were purged. The note about MacArthur's absolute control of intelligence in the Pacific, you can find that in Hogan, page 104 to 115. Okay. All right, continuing in our reading in the chapter here. Intelligence gathering in MacArthur's domain was under the command of Charles Willoughby. Born in Heidelberg, Germany in 1892, he was the love child of Baron T. Shep Weidenbach and Emma Willoughby of Baltimore, Maryland. By 1910, her romance with the Baron had soared, and Emma returned to the United States with her 18-year-old son, who immediately enlisted as a private in the U.S. Okay, U.S. Army. Sorry about that. U.S. Army, rising gradually to sergeant. When he returned to civilian life in 1913, Willoughby enrolled in Gettysburg College, where he was able to get a degree quickly. Rejoining the Army as an officer, he served in France in 1917 to 1918, then taught machine gun tactics at Fort Benning. The next few years, he served as an Army attaché at U.S. embassies in Venezuela, Colombia, and Ecuador, speaking Spanish with a heavy German accent. In 1940, after staff school at Fort Leavenworth, he was sent to Manila to be MacArthur's assistant chief of staff for logistics. At the time, Douglas MacArthur was America's field marshal of the Philippine Army. Willoughby, who craved grandeur and authority, was awed by the patrician MacArthur. In mid-1941, when MacArthur became commander of the new U.S. Far Eastern Command, Willoughby stuck with his idol. This impressed MacArthur, who valued personal loyalty above all the other qualities, and he made Willoughby his assistant chief of staff for intelligence, promoting him to colonel. When Japan attacked, Willoughby moved to Corregidor with MacArthur and then accompanied him to Australia. MacArthur wanted absolute control of intelligence gathering and special operation in his zone of command. Willoughby's qualifications for such work have been seriously questioned. Repeatedly, he blundered the battlefield estimates, but was kept on because MacArthur liked to surround himself with admirers. According to military historian Kenneth Campbell, Willoughby was often given assignments for which, quote, for which he was not remotely prepared, end quote, and his, quote, attempts to conceal his mistakes are a violation of honor, end quote. For Willoughby, truth was flexible. In Australia, Willoughby set up the Allied Intelligence Bureau to run guerrilla operations in the Philippines. He also started the Allied Translator and Interpreter Section, ATIS, to monitor Japanese radio broadcasts, interrogate prisoners, and translate captured Japanese documents. Most men in ATIS were Nisei, second-generation Japanese born in foreign countries, in this case, born in America of Japanese parents. However, Willoughby's approach to guerrilla warfare proved to be too cautious for MacArthur, who craved audacity. Leaving Willoughby in charge of intelligence gathering, MacArthur gave special operations to his intimate friend and personal attorney, Courtney A. Whitney. Willoughby was furious, but MacArthur soothed him by promoting him to general. In this way, MacArthur's intimate crony, Courtney Whitney, became the key man running secret agents in the islands and reading reports of war loot, including those of John Ballinger. The OSS had no part whatever in this. Whitney was effective in special operations because he was well connected in Manila, a clever rich man on first-name basis, with all the politically powerful families in the Philippines. In the late 1920s, when he had been fresh out of law school in Washington, D.C., MacArthur had got Whitney a job with the top Manila law firm of DeWitt, Perkins, and Enrill, who handled MacArthur's financial affairs in the islands, and also handled Benguet, the biggest gold mining operation in the islands, in which MacArthur had investments. By Pearl Harbor, Whitney was intimately involved in all manner of political, legal, and financial intrigues as played in the islands. He would call in favors from men like Santa Romana. Okay, we'll stop here for now and we'll read the rest of the endnote for this particular page, which is page 92. Okay. So the note about not remotely prepared. Willoughby's blunders cost tens of thousands of lives. MacArthur's need for adulation, you can find that in Campbell, Major General Charles A. Willoughby. The note about the Allied Translation and Intelligence Service, ATIS. The ATIS was created in September 1942. Campbell, you can find that in Campbell, Major General Charles A. Willoughby. The ATIS was given primarily responsibility for assembling, translating, and reviewing captured Japanese documents. The recollections and post-war careers of many ATIS are available online through Japanese American Veteran Associations. It is evident that some of them were not happy about what they observed about secret operations of SCAP during the occupation. Some ATIS veterans returned to live in Japan on a permanent basis with jobs on the U.S. Embassy staff in Tokyo. The note about Courtney Whitney: in 1940, MacArthur got Whitney commissioned as a major in the Reserve Officers Corps and found him a job in Washington as Assistant Chief of the Legal Division of the Army Air Force. Whitney was still in Washington when the Philippines came under Japanese attack, but soon joined MacArthur in Australia. Whitney's career, 1917 to 1943, quote, Major General Courtney Whitney, 71, advisor to MacArthur, is dead. The New York Times, March 22nd, 1969, page 33, colon 2. I don't know what that means. The switch to Whitney was made while Willoughby was in Washington in June 1943, lobbying unsuccessfully for the selection of MacArthur as the Republican Party's vice presidential candidate. Willoughby's promotion, you can find that in Shaler, Far Eastern General, page 80. The note about Whitney as MacArthur's personal lawyer. Whitney was MacArthur's personal lawyer in Manila. You can find that in Gunther, The Riddle of MacArthur, page 71. The note about DeWitt, Perkins, and Enrile. This Enrile was the father of Juan Ponce Enrile, Marcos's crony and defense minister who remains prominent in the Philippine Senate. The New York Times obituary says Whitney went to the Philippines in 1927. Philippine Supreme Court shows Whitney admitted to the Philippine bar in 1925. Whitney worked for DeWitt, Perkins, and Enrile. You can find that in Seagrave, The Marcos Dynasty. The note about Santa Romana's birth date and names of his parents comes from the wedding certificate. His brothers, sisters, and some of his children are named in his holographic will. The wedding certificate and holographic will are reproduced on our CDs. Interesting word, holographic will. I've never heard that before. Interesting. Okay. All right, we'll stop there for now. Wow, I hope you enjoyed that. There was a lot of backstories about this particular little section. We actually only read about 4 pages of the actual chapter. I think a lot of it are the endnotes. They have a lot of backstories about that. But anyways, let me know what you think. Leave some comments below. I'd love to hear from you. And I hope you guys all have a great day, great afternoon, great evening, wherever you guys are. And we'll see you next time in our next book club. Okay, bye now.